Revelation 2408b. From the 14th of July 1942. Strong or weakened will to receive. Love of God. The Spirit's effectiveness is weakened if the human being's will is not strong enough to resist external influences. The spiritual spark in the human being certainly accepts the influx from the spiritual kingdom, but it is unable to make the spiritual gifts understandable to the human being's soul, or the human being's soul is also unable to hear what is offered to it because its will is not exclusively directed towards the divine gift. And this continues until he has mustered the strength to turn away from everything that appears desirable to the body. Every connection with the spiritual world is an act of complete devotion to it. Thus the earthly, the bodily desire must be put aside, and where their will cannot be mustered for this, an unhindered working of the Spirit is not possible. Otherwise God's grace would flow towards the human being against his will, which, however, must be completely turned towards receiving this grace. The human being's will alone is decisive because it testifies to the heart's degree of love. Love for God is always expressed in the human being's will, and thus the will to receive will also be in accordance with the human being's love for God. If the heart presses towards God, then the will is also strong to overcome every obstacle, but if the will is weak, then the heart's desire for God is also not great, and thus the currents from the spiritual kingdom cannot become so effective that they can be imparted to the soul. Heartfelt prayer certainly increases the strength of will, yet this heartfeltness is also dependent on love for God. Thus it is understandable that the ability to receive is not always the same if the human being is not always in the same state of will and activity of love. The human being must constantly want to give, for then he will also constantly be allowed to receive, for the former testifies to his love for God, his will turned towards him, which is the prerequisite for the Spirit to be able to work from God. And the deeper and more intimate the devotion is, the more comprehensibly the soul hears what the Spirit wants to impart to it, for it then releases every bond with the earthly world and accepts the gifts from the spiritual world. Spiritual gifts are precious possessions which are now also to be desired and received accordingly, and therefore require the human being's undivided will in order to pass into his possession. The greater the human being's will to receive, the greater the spiritual being's will to give, which can impart the spiritual gifts to him but which are also subject to divine laws. Thus they can only work with the human being's fullest agreement, which is expressed in a strong will. Amen.